Hi, this is Paul. It is December 31, 2019. And I wanted to make a video. I thought about this when I woke up this morning, why I'm still a Christian. I've had a number of conversations with people who watched some of the videos that I made on the rise of progressive post-evangelicals. This, of course, has everything to do with the meaning crisis, has everything to do with the work of Jordan Peterson and the Jordan Peterson phenomenon around him. Hans Kuhn, of course, wrote a very famous book, Why I Am Still a Christian. And so I was Googling it, and I just was in the Google bar, and I was just typing, Why I Am Still a... And Christian was the first thing that came up, and then Catholic, and then virgin, and then I'm still a virgin quiz, and then I'm still a virgin male, and still a virgin at 20. But I inhabit the same space. I mean, some of you might say, well, you're a pastor. Well, yeah, I am a pastor. I'm still a human being. I live in the same cultural soup that all of you do. This isn't an uncommon question, as Google shows us. And I inhabit a space where you lose status by being a Christian. Now, the spaces we inhabit are very situational and layered, and that's very true. But it's not uncommon. It's probably the majority case throughout human history. And that is a really complicated thing to say, because in many cultures, if you're not a Christian, and many of you feel that, especially if you live in places like what we call the Bible Belt, which apparently Joe posted on the Discord server. Apparently the Netherlands has a Bible Belt too. It's an awfully small country to have a belt, but there you have it. But even if you're living in the midst of Christendom, you look at Kierkegaard's life, and he struggled to be an authentic Christian in the middle of an enormously Christian, self-celebratory Christian culture in Denmark. And so these questions haunt us. And I think about Jordan Peterson's comment following Nietzsche on one of the last major talks that he gave. I think it was one of the ones, he always seemed to have really important ones in Australia. But when he was dealing with the question that he says, I act as if I believe, and a little bit defensive in terms of, maybe the only true Christian was Christ. And there's an element of truth to that, because all the rest of us fall short. But we live in the midst of the meaning crisis, and the giant sucking sound in North America as people abandon maybe not necessarily Christian belief in their own minds, but abandon churches. This, of course, happened in Europe, happened in England in the 20th century. Status is really important to people, and status really determines how we live and how we affect our lives. And this was Jordan Peterson's big point with respect to lobsters, that status very much is important in terms of our emotional self-regulation. If we feel our status increasing, we're very happy. If we feel our status decreasing, we're depressed and or angry and or dangerous. It's our emotional regulatory system. So why am I still a Christian? Now, I'm part of the reason I did these progressive post-evangelical videos, and maybe I'll put this in. I made a playlist of them in case, I know some of you had trouble finding the other ones last couple of weeks with them in different orders. Oh no, there's a couple things I haven't done here. Well, I'm just thinking to myself, planning out, knowing what's coming on later in the video. I'm part of the same sociological tribe, and I pastor a church that in the 60s and 70s was full of children, and those children are gone, and most of those children don't go to church. And there's one, sometimes two, who grew up in this church that continue to attend, but the rest are all gone, and many of them aren't Christian anymore. I regularly pastor a friend of mine who is a retired pastor, and lack of church commitment by his children and the lack of faith by his grandchildren is a significant element of what he thinks about every day when we talk. And we pray regularly for his children and his grandchildren. And this is something that I know for many of you who are older out there, who are committed Christians and who are still a Christian and are planning on dying in the church, not literally in the church, spare your congregation, but plan on dying as Christians. This is an area of consternation and anxiety. And I am part of my generation, and I have all those same questions and doubts and wonderings and anxieties and cynicisms. And I wouldn't be doing these videos if I didn't have them. In some ways, these videos are a strange sort of therapy and or temptation. I have all the same cut and run temptations for all the same reasons as that many of you have. And I have all the same ideas of, well, I can improve my moral status. I can improve my status among my friends. I can improve my well-being. I can do all of this if I abandon my Christian claims, if I abandon my Christian disciplines, if I abandon my Christian identity. I in fact just noticed that there's a BuzzFeed YouTube that I'm a Christian, but I'm not closed-minded, but I'm not on and on and on. Most of the people in their young and in their 20s of kind of your standard media diversity portfolio that you'd have today. And it speaks a lot of where we're at. And I ponder this in the context of this work that I've done over the last 2 years. Again, as I said, it's December 31, 2019. I started making videos the end of November 2017. And so I've been doing this for 2 years, and it's been, one of the most richly rewarding learning opportunities of my life, one of the most richly rewarding ministry opportunities of my life, but in other ways, some of the most subtly challenging episodes of, let's say, my settled positions. I'm daily not just talking to not really debating. I don't do a lot of debate. Sometimes I think maybe I should do a little bit more debating, but sharing my space in a far less insulated world that at many other points in my life I have lived. Where did I put them? Oh, I put them over here. I received this magazine in the mail yesterday. From Faith Life. They do the Bible study software, and N.T. Wright is on the cover, and I was just paging through it, and because it's from my Bible software place, they have they have people with PhDs, and they're not gonna. This mostly goes out to pastors, and so they got to step up their game compared to. I won't put any other Christian magazines up there. Compared to a lot of other Christian magazines, and I was just reading through. Glancing at some of the articles and just thinking about how deeply insular the church is, and how these last 2 years of my life, not just in terms of the company I keep, but in terms of a lot of the videos that I'm watching and listening to, a lot of very smart people who have left the Christian faith. A lot of very smart people who challenge the Christian faith. A lot of very smart people who don't give the Christian faith any attention because it's simply non-viable for them. And that sinks in, and I wrestle with that. I wrestle, and it's not only how it sinks into me at sort of a conscious level, because in many ways that's where all my defenses are, but it seeps in underneath, and after 2 years of this, I ponder, and I think, has this work been good for my faith? I can see in many ways living at other points in my life as I have, not all of my life. I've been in and out of deeply Christian circles. As a missionary, talk to Shelley in the Discord server. As a foreign missionary, it's a very weird experience where you're doing what many people consider to be one of the most heroic things Christians can do. And so often you feel so isolated and separated, even from the church that you might be building and growing and supporting and encouraging in another culture. I think that was part of what it's part of why I spent 7 years as a missionary and not 30, and everything that contributed to that. And some of the hardest emails I get are not necessarily from people who don't believe. That's, again, the things that are at the conscious level. I'm as a seasoned, mature Christian, well-armed to address the frontal attacks. And in fact, many of my less Christian human motives, as John Vervaeke likes to talk about, this desire to win, that marshals some of the least Christian elements of my implicit biases and reactivities, so that when there's a frontal assault on my tribe, all my tribalistic instincts rise up in order to defend my people. Now, that's in many ways, as a human being, that's good and normal, and we need that. But in another way, as a Christian, that's what leads to Christians behaving badly in all sorts of ways, and Christians who protested too much as defenders of Christianity, when they flip, they go all the way over to the other side, and everyone says, uh-huh. And of course, in that tribal game, everybody loves it when pastors flip, because there you've got a key person. Just like in the tribal game, everybody loves it when outspoken atheists flip, and that happens too. And so what I recognize and what I tell people so often in my videos is that, why should you go to church? Because so much of what makes us seeps into us. It's the stuff that we are immersed in that we become. And so if you actually want to change, you need to change what you are immersed in. And of course, everyone who goes through a sobriety process knows this. You need different friends. You need different rituals. You need different habits. And so if you're going to become a Christian, you need different rituals, friends, and habits if you're going to actually make that jump in many cases. Not all. Sometimes things happen and bang, night and day. At least at certain levels. But, I recognize, when I got this magazine in the mail, I recognize, wow, what has 2 years of intensive watching and listening to videos in this space that I'm doing, how has that changed me deep down? There was early on when I first found Jordan Peterson, before I started making videos, a colleague of mine had also found Jordan Peterson, and we were talking about it. And then he stopped watching the videos, and he said to me, he says, well, I realized I was watching Jordan Peterson more than I was reading the Bible. And now you can take that a lot of different ways, but he had a point. And I wrestled with that because, okay, I'm immersing myself, and I listened to Jordan Peterson hours a day. I'd done that to Tim Keller years before, and I was doing it for reasons that I really needed it then. I was having all sorts of different crises in my life, and I needed to borrow from his strength. And so listening to 10 or 15 or 20 Tim Keller talks or sermons a week, I needed that then. But I'm listening to 10, 15, or 20 videos from all over the meaning crisis now, and how few Christian books I've read in the last year. And I'm so grateful to my vocation as a minister, where every week I must immerse myself in the study of the text and in prayer and in those disciplines. And it just reminds me that to continue to work in this effort and to remain a Christian, I have to maintain, I must do it from within the Christian community, but I can't be insular in that community. Some of the toughest emails I get are are not from atheists who, there's some people out there that send me, messages, comments. I'm full of crap. All right, that's fine. Again, my defenses are up. Those kind of things don't bother me. The hardest emails I get are from well-meaning Christians who write to me and say, "Oh, look at who you're talking about in your videos." For a long time, there were regular comments about people. We've got all these videos about Jordan Peterson. We need more videos about Jesus. And I say, well, look at my church channel over there. They're all about Jesus. I hardly ever talk about Jordan Peterson in my sermons or my Sunday school class. Although those of you who watch these videos can see a lot that the stuff is coming out of the same head. But very well-meaning Christians send me videos, or not videos, sometimes videos, mostly emails, just warning me. Oh, you shouldn't be talking to these people. These are smart people, and they're going to lead you astray. Don't read Jung. Don't read Nietzsche. Don't listen to so much Peterson. Don't talk to Vervaeke. Don't even talk to Peugeot, icon carver. And I come from not a real iconoclast tradition, but there it is. Spend all that time with sinners. Spend all that time with Pharisees, the other side would say. So this work has an interesting relationship with my faith. A number of years ago, I read Clarence Boomsma's book, Why I Still Believe the Gospel. Clarence Boomsma was a rather prominent minister in the Christian Reformed Church, had a very prominent pulpit at Calvin Christian Reformed Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan. You can't get more Christian Reformed than that. Not very far from the old Franklin Street campus, a little bit of inside baseball for you CRC people. Oh, there's the book. And he begins the book. When I retired after serving 40 years in gospel ministry, I ended my farewell remarks to my fellow pastors by affirming that I still believed the gospel that I had preached and taught all those years. That confession was rooted in my personal pilgrimage of faith and doubt through a lifetime in which I faced the powerful challenges of unbelief from the modern world and wrestled with its monumental assaults on the Christian faith. Meaning crisis is real. Let's see what the 2007, but this I think would be imagined 2007. Yeah, that would be about his retirement. Well, maybe earlier than that. I don't know. I should turn it to that dyslexic font because I noticed that I can actually. Oh, this book can't do it. All right, I actually do read better that dyslexic font. By saying that I still believe, I recalled a crucial, poignant crisis that shook me deeply shortly after I had entered the ministry 4 decades earlier. I had asked myself haunting questions after reading 2 books that severely challenged my faith and the legacy of my ministry. Can I honestly and with personal integrity continue to believe and preach the gospel? At the end of my ministry, what will my confession be? Will I still believe the gospel? The first book was the classic work by Albert Schweitzer entitled The Quest of the Historical Jesus. It had been reading assignment in a New Testament course in seminary, but at the time I read it fast and uncritically under the pressure of my other studies and demanding extracurricular workload. But I recognized it as a book of defining importance and resolved to read it more carefully when I was in the ministry. So soon after settling into my first congregation, I reread this masterful survey of the history of critical investigation of the life of Jesus that had begun 150 years earlier with scholars committed to the secular values of the Enlightenment. The book culminated with Schweitzer's own contribution to the quest, in which he characterized Jesus as a man obsessed with the immediacy of the coming of the kingdom of God by divine intervention, though through himself as God's Messiah. Schweitzer concluded with a bleak and tragic picture of Jesus and his crucifixion, finally surrendering his faith and vision in defeat and despair as witnessed in his awful cry of dereliction, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Schweitzer continued, "At midday on the same day, it was 14th Nisan, and in the evening the Paschal lamb would be eaten. Jesus cried aloud and expired. He had chosen to remain fully conscious to the last. For Schweitzer, there was no resurrection. He apparently deemed the resurrection so obviously impossible for modern-day readers to believe that he felt no need to argue the point. Nonetheless, he described the life and death of Jesus in terms of cosmic heroism. Jesus, in the knowledge that he was the coming Son of Man, laid hold of the wheel of the world to set it moving in the last revolution, which is to bring all ordinary history to a close. And in many ways, Jesus did. Schweitzer would continue to imagine himself a Christian and call himself a Christian. I'm not going to say he wasn't. It refused to turn, and he throws himself upon it. Then it does turn. It crushes him. Instead of bringing in the eschatological conditions, he has destroyed them. The wheel rolls onward in the mangled body of one immeasurably great man who was strong enough to think of himself as a spiritual leader of mankind, as to bend history to its purposes, is hanging upon it still. That is his history and his reign. And many who have rejected the resurrection of Jesus still see it as a pivotal, monumental, spiritual, all of those things. But I, with Boomsma, see the loss of the resurrection as a critical loss for understanding what is central to my faith. Schweitzer defines what is significant about Jesus for me. We must be prepared to find that the historical knowledge of the personality and life of Jesus will not be a help, but perhaps even an offense to religion. Now remember, Schweitzer's writing in a very different time too. But this is very much connects with the project that I've been undertaking and the conversations that I've been having. But the truth is, it is not Jesus as historically known, but Jesus as spiritually arisen within men, who is significant for our time and can help it. And I hear those messages all the time. Not the historical Jesus, but the Spirit which goes forth from him, and the spirits of men thrive for new influence and rule. It is that which overcomes the world. It is not given to history to disengage that which is abiding and eternal in the being of Jesus from the historical forms in which it worked itself out through, and to introduce it into our world as a living influence. The abiding and eternal in Jesus is absolutely independent of historical knowledge and can only be understood by contact with his Spirit. Capital H, lowercase s. If you watch my Sunday school lessons, you'll know I pay very close attention to capitals and lowercase, especially when you're reading modern English translations of the Bible. Contact with his Spirit, which is still at work in the world. And it is still at work in the world. And so much of what Schweitzer says is true there. But why do you give up the resurrection? Why can't you believe it now? Isn't that a function of the same zeitgeist and spirit? Ancient people didn't have trouble. Well, they did, and that's what's so difficult about this stuff. Did ancient people believe the resurrection? Most people heard it, said, no, that's crazy talk, but others did. That same dynamic remains true today. The second book he read. Here we go. It was in this troubled state of mind that I read a second book that had been given to me during my seminary years, but which I had not read. I got a lot of books I haven't read yet. Confessions of an Old Priest, published in 1922. This stuff isn't new. Some 20 years before my ordination in 1943, the author, S.D. McConnell, an Episcopalian, I believe, published a book after his retirement explaining why he no longer believed what he had proclaimed for 50 years. He had begun his ministry as an Orthodox Bible-believing Christian from a Scottish Presbyterian background who accepted the Christian faith as taught through the centuries. But during his years in the service of the church, he had become progressively more liberal in his views, though he had chosen not to make public how his mind was changing. Why not? Because he would lose status, because he would lose money, because he would lose his job. But that happens with so many ministers. Once you slide off into your pension, well now, but legally they got to pay you your pension, so now you can say what you really think, and that's when everybody listens. And it's a complex dynamic that pastors can't say what they really think, or when they don't say what they really think. Sort of like presidents, sort of like CEOs, sort of like parents. It's worthy of a whole separate video, but it's complex. But during his years in the service of the church, by the time of his retirement, he had become what was called in those days a thoroughgoing modernist. He no longer believed that Jesus was the unique, divine Son of God, nor that the church was rooted in divine revelation. He had not shared his growing unbelief while active in the ministry, and probably for some very good reasons that aren't simply cynical. He had a job to do, so he did it. Good for him. Did his duty. Retirement? Let him know what he thinks. But upon retirement, he felt compelled to explain the steps and stages that led to the complete collapse of his faith in classic formulations of the Christian belief. McConnell summarizes his rejection of the alleged factual foundation of the Christian faith. The alleged facts are the foundation upon which Christianity, is founded. And again, in many ways, this is the subtraction story of Christianity, of Christian faith. That Jesus was conceived of the Holy Ghost, born of the Virgin, died and was buried and rose again, ascended into heaven, from whence he rules the universe. Much of that from the Apostles' Creed, which isn't in the Bible. If these were not factual realities, belief in the incarnation, the atonement, the judgment of the Son of Man are but silly imaginings. When I first began to be uneasy in the presence of these dogmas, I began to realize that they were out of all relation to intellectual integrity, to ethical values, to the facts of human experience. I consoled myself with the thought that they were illegitimate conclusions from an accepted life and teaching of Jesus. Further reflection convinced me that if Jesus of the New Testament was and did and said the things he is represented to have done, the dogmatic conclusions are not only legitimate but inevitable. They are the only interpretations possible of such a life. No phenomena in the whole history of the race or conceived of the mind of man can equal these facts if they are facts. They transcend all events, all discoveries. We are dulled to their significance by their constant iteration. Their constant iteration. He's not saying we're dulled to them by their constant denial. Again, like I said, the frontal attack, you'll find me in, I can't think of John's words of these things, in victory mode, in tribal mode, where, you're not a Christian, I'm a Christian, let's debate, let's go at it. Then you'll find me spouting all of those things. But it's rumored that C.S. Lewis, when he would go to the Socratic Club, which he started at the bidding of a women's college, and there's something in the 20th century I'd love to visit. I'd love to listen to C.S. Lewis debate in the Socratic Club, because the word was no one could put Lewis down. But it was also said he never struggled more with doubts than after he had put down an opponent. The thing is, he was just so brilliant. He knew all the arguments. He had this phenomenal memory, could quote almost anything from ancient literature in the original language. I mean, no one could take him on. But after he had bested his enemies, never did his faith feel so weak. What is that? Why is that? Because, so it's not the Sam Harrises that dull the faith. It's the constant iteration sometimes. These are they are the only interpretations possible of such a life. No phenomenon in the whole history of the race or conceivable by the mind of man can equal these facts, if they be facts. They transcend all events, all discoveries. We are dulled by their significance, by their constant iteration. And I find that as a pastor all the time. How can I help? I had this. I tell people my best videos are actually not on this channel. My best videos are my Sunday school lessons on the other channel, because that's where I'm rawest, because I sit in a room with mostly African American women in their 70s, and we read the Bible together and we talk about it. And one thing I love about senior citizens, especially women, when they get into their 70s and 80s, they have so little to lose in this world. They will tell you exactly what they think. I remember when I was first new at this church, and we had a vacation Bible school, and I decided to do a class for adults, and a whole bunch of women in their 70s and 80s show up, and I was going to give a talk on marriage. Some of these women had been married 2, 3, 4 times. I was in my 30s. Boy, they ran me around the room. I knew nothing. And these women were ready to speak the truth and let me know as they saw it. It was just that flat. We are dulled to their significance by their constant iteration. It is a fact that in the whole history of the race, one child and one only named Jesus was born of a Virgin Mary. Can you believe that? Did he speak words of such supernal knowledge as would be impossible for any man? Sam Harris doesn't believe that. We'll play that a little later in this video. Did he by a word heal lepers, restore palsied limbs, give sight to those born blind? Did he raise dead men from the graves? Did he rise again from the tomb himself? Did he? Unless these were veritable occurrences in the same sense as the assassination of Julius Caesar, the overwhelming of Pompey, and the conquest of Alexander, the sanction and obligation of Christianity disappears. If, on the other hand, they be real historical events, then all the claims and conclusions of theological dogma and all the statements of the creeds are too little rather than too much. In that case, exaggeration is impossible. If the facts are so, the Trisagion and the Te Deum are all too feeble. See how bad my liturgical knowledge is? Jonathan Peugeot should vow to never speak to me again. But devotion and worship must wait in silence until the question of fact is determined. We're talking historical facts. Now, you can go find Esther O'Reilly. She'll debate those things to you all day. That's not really my tradition. But they mean the world in this case. But what is more illusory and more ephemeral than historical facts? They fly away in the age of decay by the sands of time. McConnell found no credible evidence. That's the Scottish Presbyterian minister who gave up the faith. He found no credible evidence. And he acknowledged, in fact, not only did he retire and, he wrote a book in retirement. He obviously felt philosophical, moral instincts to be right about this. McConnell found no credible evidence, and he acknowledged that the zeitgeist of the Enlightenment had molded him unconsciously so that he had come to dismiss all miracles, including the resurrection, as being not only intellectually incredible, but that belief in them was ethically debauching. This is far harder than Sam Harris can ever be. I have become convinced that miracles do not happen, have never happened, and ought not happened, he says on page 30. Nowhere does he explicitly deal with the resurrection of Jesus, but merely includes it in the catalog of biblical miracles he does not believe. McConnell's book, for me, a shattering attack and rejection of all the fundamentals of the Christian faith, similar to my own, that the author once believed but had discarded in the light of natural and social sciences, the historical scientific criticism of the Bible, and the encounter with the dogmas and belief of other world religions. That's important too. The pluralism is tremendously challenging. Who are we to say our list of miracles are right and the others' miracles are wrong? Who are we to say our holy books are true and the other holy books are wrong? I found McConnell's confessions particularly disturbing when they pinpointed and addressed many of my unanswered questions and confronted boldly the doubts of which I was aware but had tabled and ignored in my mind. These two provocative books were a severe challenge for which I had no reasonable reply. My seminary training had not prepared me for, nor seriously addressed, such monumental assaults on the fundamentals of the Christian faith. I had a wonderful conversation with Preston Sprinkle. He went to a seminary that had all that stuff. And there are seminaries that do nothing but train you in apologetics. But again, when in the frontal tribal assault That's not where the challenge is. The challenge is seeping up from below. No one expects the meaning crisis. Riffing on Monty Python's Spanish Inquisition. It seeps up on below. It doesn't come full front knocking at the door. It's in the water we drink. It's in the air we breathe. It's in all of the screens in front of our eyes. But these secularizing conceits I knew were shaping, permeating, dominating the entire educated world, leaving little room for the truth of Christianity and its relevance for modern life. Schweitzer and McConnell were both inheritors of the clash between belief and revelation and scientific thought. When the latter presented itself as the sole champion of truth and decided that it was possible to detect what was true from what was untrue by means of scientific criteria. In other words, when it was decided that truth can be discovered by the scientific method. Shortly into my first year of my ministry, I had a disturbing visit with a college classmate and a friend who was teaching psychology at the University of Michigan. He asked me with a touch of sadness and concern if I was aware that the biblical Orthodox faith of our church that he had been taught at our denominational college, Calvin College no doubt, was totally rejected and completely ignored by the faculties of the university. Orthodox Christianity simply had no respect or credibility on the university campus. The dominance of science outlawed any role for the supernatural in any area of life. I knew that after the modernist fundamentalist controversies in the 1920s, Orthodox Christianity had faded from the screen of the media as a dying, discredited subculture that deserved to be ignored. Any religious news that was still reported always involved the bigger churches of the liberal mainline denominations. That's during the Cold War, of course, where church attendance reached its highest in American history. Even though the clash of modernism with orthodoxy was still a live issue in many churches, my seminary training dealt with it only tangentially. We went to the same seminary, me and Clarence Boomsma. He in the 40s, my father in the 50s, me in the 80s. That didn't change. We were trained, and I'm grateful for it, in classical Reformed theology. There's no other, if someone comes to me and says, what kind of seminary education should I get? I'd say get a seminary education in biblical studies in the original languages and in classical theology. Even though the clash of modernism with orthodoxy was still a live issue with many, still a live issue with many churches, my seminary training dealt with it only tangentially. It was not, I believe, that my seminary professors were unaware of the strife between the gospel and modernism. I do recall that Professor D.H. Crominga, now you got to remember, my grandfather went to the seminary in the 20s. Boomsma went in the 40s. My father went in the 50s. I went in the 80s. I mean, this is deep in my DNA. D.H. Crominga, he was the father of my professor of preaching at seminary. That's how insular and in-house the CRC has been over its years. D.H. Crominga, one of my favorite teachers, believed the cleavage between orthodoxy and modernism to be so radical and fundamental that the chasm between them was unbridgeable, and that each camp might as well go its own way without pursuing a resolution in their differences. And that's what a lot of people write me. Don't talk to these. Why do you work on this? Turn your back and leave it behind. Be an Essene. Go into the desert. Write scrolls in caves. Write magazines for Christian audiences that Christians will read. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But like my father, I suppose I'm a missionary at heart and I can't give it up. So I wade into the ditch. The history of the past half century had largely demonstrated the accuracy of Crominga's assessment. The fact is that fundamentalism, no longer on the radar of the media, went its own way. And it didn't go well. It's the progressive post-evangelicals are children of that movement of, we're going to put them in a box, we're going to insulate them, we're going to isolate them. And the Christian Reform had, Rod Dreher wrote the Benedict option. And when I started reading his stuff, it was like, The Christian Reformed Church practiced the Benedict option until the Second World War, when the draft happened and all those CRC ministers went off to, people would be CRC ministers, and elders and deacons went off to war, and Baptists and all kinds of others. Well, Christianity is broader. And then they went to University of Michigan and they got all these advanced degrees, and the people of the Christian Reformed Church flourished. But the walls were down. And you can no longer be a hothouse Christian. It, meaning fundamentalism, continued to grow in expanding numbers in the latter half of the 20th century, and part of it evolved into the evangelicalism that gained much intellectual and learned respectability in the world at large. Today, I think he wrote this book I don't think it was 2000, could it be 2007? I don't know. 40 years. Graduate, retired in the 80s, because I remember he was old in the 80s. Someone from the CRC who listens to this will leave me a comment. Today, evangelicalism has the attention of the media and is much in the news, in a more dominant force in American society and politics than the old mainline liberal churches. Certainly was true in the 80s. Numerous conservative seminaries are crowded with thousands of students who go on to occupy pulpits and build megachurches throughout the country. Meanwhile, the fortunes of liberalism have come upon hard times in mainline churches and institutions. Union Theological Seminary in New York City, which in the 1950s was a leading bastion of theological liberalism, with more than 700 students, now advertises in the Christian Century that it has room to let for visitors to New York City. Each camp, orthodoxy and modernism, has gone its own way without any significant rapprochement. Today, the class in religion is primarily between secularism and evangelicalism, both within and outside the mainline churches, and that has moved on. While Schweitzer's and McConnell's books precipitated an existential crisis of faith at the very beginning of my ministry, they were not my first encounter with the powerful assaults that undermine and destroy the faith of so many people reared in the church. I've always had an inquisitive mind, and already in junior high I was introduced to the challenge that modern science posed to the Bible, like little Tom Holland seeing dinosaurs and people together and saying his Sunday school teacher, "What's with this?" and his Sunday school teacher's insufficient response leading to his disbelief even at the age of 6. Oh, how precocious young Tom Holland was. Tom Holland, the author, not the movie star. I mean, maybe he was precocious too. I was introduced to the challenge that modern science poses to the Bible with its discovery of the immensity of time and the immensity of space and the eons of time, and particularly its evolutionary hypothesis of the world's origins. Later, on a street corner in Grand Rapids one Sunday evening, I spoke with a man, either a Hindu or a Muslim, who caustically derided me and Christians for maintaining Christianity as the one true religion. It was my first encounter with the challenge of other religions that has intensified in the world as the world has increasingly shrunk with modern communication and transportation. That's shrunk a lot since Boomsma's book. It was my first While canvassing on behalf of my home church in Indiana, I met an older man, an atheist, who was very certain and vocal that there was nothing at all to that Christian stuff on the basis of his own experience. I was embarrassed at the time because I did not know how to respond to his confident rejection of my beliefs. And I would have to say that a lot of those who feel themselves quite ready to respond are exactly the people I wouldn't want to have respond to it. Because again, just all the tribal defenses go up and we play the same games and there's nothing to it. That's why I so love this little corner of the internet that has developed, and the opportunity for conversations in our meetups and with Vervaeke and with many of you who aren't Christians who pursue conversations with me. I deeply appreciate it. Beginning in high school and continuing in college, I learned from my history, science, and philosophy courses and textbooks how dominant were the naturalistic perspectives of modern life, that it need no God or room for the supernatural everywhere. And again, you know how I feel about that word supernatural, but he's using it. That's the dominant frame of modernity. I'm going to read it. Take that on in other videos. Such was my earlier exposure to the powerful challenges directed against my orthodox understanding of the Christian faith. My experience is probably typical of many students reared in Christian homes that bifurcated them with an unresolved tension between their secular education and their Christian faith. What the reading of Schweitzer and McConnell did was to bring the full impact of these assaults into sharper focus with a devastating critique of my faith for which I lacked the resources to reply. Those resources, as a pastor, he would have to find. This is true of me too. We're interesting creatures, and one of the interesting things I've learned about bones and muscles is that they grow through stress. What do I mean they grow through stress? When you're going to the gym and you're lifting weights, what are you doing to your bones? You cause these tiny little micro fissures and fractures, and they break and have to heal. And you create these tiny little tears in your muscles, and they swell. It's where they get large, and they have to heal. I read this in this Quora piece and was just fascinated by bones and how they go. So now obviously if you break a bone, if you have a serious fracture, well, that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for little fractures and stress. And I think faith grows in the same way. And here in this article, it's so interesting how there's different kinds of material, whereas skin sheds and we grow new skin. Bone can't do that. It's all on the inside. So it kind of eats itself and then has to build new stuff. And that's why after 30, your bones get weaker and weaker unless I got to hit the gym. I need a better exercise regimen. You know who you are that says I got to go to the gym. The best way to strengthen bones is not to fracture them or even to hit them, because you just whacking a bone against the wall doesn't get to it. It's by exercise and training. You exercise, especially the weight bearing kind, then that will stimulate the bone to remodel positively with more new bone than is replaced. Whenever you do lots of extreme exercise or fighting, you get micro calluses or micro fractures, and these stimulate remodeling. And this is really my answer to those that say I should live an insular life and just do the Christian things. But the difficult thing is the right balance. The right balance. Just hard enough to tear and break, but not too hard to really tear and break. And so, will my immersion in this change me? Yeah. My immersion in overseas missionaries, being a missionary, changed me. My immersion in pastoral ministry within the church has changed me. My reading the Bible changes you. I find so many people that have rather flippant, facile understandings of the Bible haven't read it much, because when you read the Bible, you begin it's there's a lot in that book, and I've told the story before of my mother-in-law who we were having a debate about Bible and science, and stuff was going on in the newspapers in Grand Rapids and Calvin College about it, and she's a fundamentalist Baptist, and here her daughter is dating a guy from the Christian Reformed Church. That wasn't really what my wife's mother was looking for, because CRC people, we're too liberal for the fundamentalists and we're too fundamental for the liberals. We're always in the middle in the Christian Reformed Church. And so talking about Genesis 1, and I was challenging her on something, and she pulls that. So Genesis 1, read it. There's this firmament on top, and the earth is flat, and there's a firmament, and this whole picture in Genesis 1. I said, pull out your Bible. She had her King James Bible, and I opened it up, and she had penciled corrections in the book of Genesis. I said, Ma, you're not allowed to do this. Read the Bible. Read the real thing. And it's challenging, and it's disturbing, and it does this work in you of breaking these facile arguments, and it strains you, and it stresses you. And doubt and faith sort of work together like these micro calluses and micro fractures in your bones and muscles, and you grow stronger because of them. And this is what we can see with Clarence Boomsman. Probably part of the reason he was such a successful minister was because he doubted and had those doubts. Yesterday I had to spend a fair amount of time dealing with a homeless woman who came in on Sunday and left her stuff in the church and then started walking around in the middle of my sermon, distracting the whole congregation. They're supposed to be listening to me. They're all watching her. And finally, a woman of the congregation stood up and walked her out the door. And she's a unmedicated schizophrenic. It's pretty clear. I deal with a lot of them. And then she came back the next day looking for her stuff, and the woman who runs the child care center, that whole thing was a debacle. And Monday mornings, I'm usually not here. It calls me, Pastor, you got to get down here, this woman. Okay, and I'm used to dealing with these folks, and it's usually a lot of patience and kindness and gentleness, and one way or another you can get things sorted out. And I looked at this poor woman, and I know what happens to homeless schizophrenic women on the streets, and it's not pretty. And you spend a little while with it, and you say, well, why do I do this crazy job? Now, what is really motivating me to stay and be a Christian? You know, one of Jordan Peterson's chapters in, do I not have it here? Oh boy, take away my Jordan Peterson card. 12 Rules for Life. That I didn't make a video on this chapter, but it was one of the best chapters in his book, where he really brutally deconstructs the morality in a very Nietzschean way, the morality that we say we have. Do I stay a Christian because I want to maintain status? Is it cowardice? Is it sloth? Do I not want to disappoint the people in my church? Do I not want to lose my job? Do I not want to disappoint the parts of my family that remain Christian? Why stick it out? I can preserve status staying a Christian just like I can lose status staying a Christian. Finance, reputation. The grandmother of a member came to church here once and listening to my sermon says to her grandson, why don't they get that man a better church? I think I've got the best church around, quite frankly. Yeah, it's small. Yeah, it's dying. But the quality of the saints, the authenticity of their muddled lives. You know, it's a pain in the neck dealing with the homeless. She's standing right in front of a pile of feces I got to pick up. It's human feces, which is, yeah, it's a normal part of my job, unclogging toilets, picking up feces, picking up garbage. I watched my father do this 36 years in Patterson. Snow, he'd go down there and shovel the parking lot. He liked shoveling snow, which is a good thing. Moving people's fridges. Never in my life would I have thought I'd be doing what my father did and enjoying it. I remember after my father had retired, and boy, he's leading 3 or 4 Bible studies, preaching whenever he's asked, doing whatever the church would want for the most part. And I asked him, I said, Dad, you still like this stuff? Love it more than ever, he said to me. Believed it more than ever. So do I stick the faith because I want to be with my father? Is it just, you can open up my head and find worlds of psychological reasons that I try to pass off to you as things that will improve my status, what Jordan Peterson calls lying pastors. Absolutely, it's absolutely true. Why do I'm still the Christian? One of the ways that I've been strengthened over these last 2 years are the miraculous power of the Bible over time. I'm always fascinated by the responses to my videos, so I like reading the comment section when I have time. I'm too hard on Brett Weinstein. I'm too soft on Brett Weinstein. I'm too hard on Sam Harris. I'm too soft on Sam Harris. That was a crappy conversation. That was a good conversation. That's just normal human beings. We all got these independent brains, and we're in an independent culture, and we're all contrarians, and we got all these opinions. But I'll tell you, learned a lot about the Bible. Look, did I learn about it? No. Realized a number of things about the Bible listening to Jordan Peterson and now Brett Weinstein talk about it in this conversation. Let's play some of it.
Matter.
Right, but why have any more respect for Iron Age religion?
I got a video in my head about that line, and I'm glad I finally found it. Just about 3 hours right there. Iron Age religion.
why have any more respect for Iron Age religion? First of all, I'm not sure why you go back to the Iron Age. I believe we are talking about...
Well, if you're going to be Abrahamic about it, or at least with respect to Judaism and Christianity, you're more or less there.
Because I'm not sure that that's exactly what we're doing. We're talking about why tread carefully around structures whose roots go back to the Iron Age.
Well, no, but specific beliefs, right?
Yes.
And like, I mean, the crucial thing for me, with respect to any of these religions, the only thing that an atheist needs to do to win the argument is to point out that there's no reason to believe that any of these books are anything other than books, right? It's a textual claim. Again, just now we're talking about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Sure.
The moment
That's your best argument, Sam?
you deal with the books, the moment you say these books do not bear the slightest sign of omniscient authorship. We know too much about how they were authored.
The reason
Or at
they
least
work has
edited.
nothing to do with the supernatural.
Yeah, and what's more, if you just think of how good a book would be if it were the product of omniscience, it just beggars belief that anyone imagines these books were the product.
I'm right here, Sam. I'm right here. I'm still here. But again, the frontal assault, that's easy. I got my tribal instincts. I've got all my human reactivity ready to have me debate Sam back and forth, back and forth. There's some collateral stuff that happens along the side with the observers, but that's a game too. We all know that.
Product of omniscience. So the moment you do that, you have destroyed these religions. It's an unrecoverable error to I mean, it is the point past which no self-respecting. I mean, Judaism is a slight tweak on this because
I guess I've got no self-respect then.
most Jews have lost their religion and just don't want to admit it. But the moment you get past this textual claim, and you reduce these to being books like any other books, susceptible to criticism like any other books, and then this is a quick step to admitting that they're not even especially good books on very important topics most of the time, right? And so then
See, this is why I say, I mean, Brett, I got a lot. My respect for Brett is immense, just by the way as how he handles this conversation. He's very patient. Let Sam have his say. Good for him.
Then you're left finding these, diamonds in the dunghill that are still diamonds. I mean, the golden rule is fantastic wherever you find it, and if you find it in the New Testament, great.
And I'm going to do a video, or want to do a video, or I'm intending to do a video, whether I actually get around to it, that's a whole nother story, to contend with some of these issues, because there's a lot you can say about all of these things that Sam is saying, but I'm not as patient as Brett. I'm keep interrupting him.
But it is an utterly seditious concession to force upon religious people that these are just books written by human beings.
I guess that would be me who's guilty of that, the forcing it on religious people. That's because I'm the pastor. I'm doing the priestcraft here.
Well, but they're not just books.
Well, no, but nor are the books of Shakespeare, and nor the plays of Shakespeare, and
Shakespeare, as far as I know,
Noah's Ovid, Ovid and Homer. They're all pregnant with metaphor and.
See, Sam doesn't let Brett say his piece. Brett's about to say something, but Sam's thinking he knows what Brett's going to say, but Brett is actually going to say a whole lot more than just,
life application.
That's not what renders them unbook-like. What renders them unbook-like is the process of evolution of what is the content. In other words, you have...
But many of these have been set in stone and have resisted evolution.
Right. And so the more set in stone they are, the more likely you are to have basically mimetic hitchhikers traveling along with and I don't mean good necessarily, but the fitness-enhancing wisdom inside of the things. You'll get hitchhikers if the whole thing is frozen in a state. On the other hand, if you have something, let's take Christianity, for example. Christianity, you have lots of debate within Christendom about what to believe and how to apply it and what its implications are and all of that. And those sectarian differences are the mimetic diversity upon which selection acts. So what we find are populations who have a sacred canon that has been compared to competitors and found effective. I'm trying not to use normative terms because I don't believe the normative terms are inherently warranted.
See my last video about scientific image and the manifest image. Normative terms are, of course, that's what Wilfrid Sellis says. There's the boundary line. It's the normativity here, okay? In terms of the ought. But what Sam Harris, but what Brett Weinstein just laid down there is an argument I first began to realize because I listened to Jordan Peterson, and Brett said it in a way I could never say it because he's a biologist, because he understands that there's this evolutionary process, and it's not even just the words, it's everything that the words bring up with it. In fact, this is so good. When I hear stuff like this, I got to hear it multiple times so that maybe at some point I can begin to use these words myself, because as a pastor, I may be a liar, but I'm also really a thief, and what I'm looking for is language to steal.
But to take what we saw, for example, Christianity, you have lots of debate within Christendom about what to believe and how to apply it and what its implications are and all of that. And those sectarian differences are the mimetic diversity upon which selection acts.
The sectarian differences are the mimetic diversity upon which the
implications are and all of that. And those sectarian differences are the mimetic diversity upon which selection acts.
Are the mimetic diversity upon which selection acts. He says that so well, and I've been trying to say just that idea in how many different ways, but I don't have the language of a biologist to be able to say this. And he says it right here, and it's like, bang, there it is. Now, of course, Christians are going to hear that and say, well, it's the Word of God. Yeah, but it's also that. And in some ways, that's how you know it's the Word of God. The difficulty is that you cannot conceive of this one way or another without a narrative or a framework, and those narrative and frameworks are going to be all over the place. And the dismissiveness that Sam Harris brings to it is just uninformed. And it doesn't, and this is exactly what Jordan Peterson was trying to say to Sam, you're just not taking the evidence. I'm not talking, you hold up the book and it glows. I'm not talking that kind of evidence. Evidence, historical evidence through time. This book just keeps going. It's more studied, it's more translated, it's more printed. It is the most viral piece of literature in all of human history, and there is no close second to it. And just the mystery of the Jews there's a reality to Christianity that you cannot ignore, and Jordan has seen that. And Jordan and Christianity, whatever. And I just watched Vervaeke and a friend of his, Anderson, I think it was. Wow, what a amazing conversation. How challenging for me. That really stressed my bones and my muscles listening to that conversation, and hopefully that weight and time, those microfissures will make me stronger, and all of this has made me stronger. And what Brett said right there is exactly yes. Say, dismiss the Bible. Well, go ahead. As Jordan Peterson says, you dismiss it at your peril because, you believe in biology? Well, guess what? You want to see a mimetic victor? Look at that book. Yes, say what you want about all the stuff in it. That stuff has been said about the Bible forever, but it's still here. And it amazes me that you've got these people talking about evolution. Well, watch evolution. So I'm watching these I'm watching Brett wrestle with this stuff. And yet Brett doesn't believe. I get that. But when I listen to him in this conversation, he's acting in good faith, and he's got real doubts, and he'll sit down with a guy like Alistair McGrath, and I wish they'd had a better conversation. Because Alistair McGrath is a brilliant, brilliant man. But part of the reality of these conversations is we don't have time for them. And the higher status you have, the less time you have for conversation. Even my little paltry status limits my opportunity to speak, but I get to speak with other people. So on and on and on. But there's amazing stuff going on. And you think, well, Christianity, it's just getting swept from the table. No, it isn't. Every day I have people write me and try to find me and talk to me, and they tell me the same story. They say, Paul, I'm trying to pray. I want to pray. I want to believe. But I'm struggling. I say, yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. I struggle too, and I struggle too because of all the reasons you do. And so you're not going to lose status in my eyes for having questions and doubts and problems and issues. Because I got them too. Clarence Boomsma had them. Anyone who's honest, I think, or most of us, they're common, okay? And then this clip, you can see the greatest clips of 2019, the ones that I come to again and again and again and again. This one I tried to reiterate in my Sunday school class last Sunday.
How much of Christianity has to do with the life of Jesus and his suffering on the cross, and how much of it is to do with the accretions that occurred afterwards, and people like St. Paul, all the people who've sort of interpreted it? And
well, the question of who the historical Jesus was is fortunately one that I don't have to engage with because it's irrelevant to the story that I'm telling. And essentially, to have an opinion on that, you need to have studied it for years and years and years, and even then, you probably wait.
And of course, Schweitzer is what Boomsma, caused his crisis of faith. But he's right. I mean, study anything in Christianity, and that alone will take your whole life.
Is there much on the historical Jesus?
I don't know, just a little.
Oh, I mean, there are entire forests have been felled to provide the books which discuss the issue of what the relationship of the historical Jesus is to the Jesus of the four canonical Gospels. So that's not important. But what is important is the figure of Jesus in the Gospels. And that is remarkable enough, even if it bears no correspondence to a historical Jesus at all. Right. Because if you
which was Schweitzer's argument in some ways.
Think about it. I mean, it's the most challenging literary gig you could possibly imagine. I mean, imagine being told you've got to write a story in which, for the first time, somebody who suffers the excruciating death of a slave is going to be cast as in some way being a part of the one creator God who's fashioned everything. And he's got to be convincing not just to people now, but for 2,000 years and across the whole span of the world. I mean, it's a really astonishing thing to have pulled off as a literary feat, and that 4 people did it is amazing.
And that 4 people did it and didn't write anything else. I mean, they weren't Shakespeare. That 4 people did it, and that was most of what they wrote. When we talk about the great literary figures of humanity, there's massive questions about who wrote Matthew, Mark, and John. It's not like they're Shakespeare or Homer, Sam Harris. They're not. But so 4 people did it within the span of not a lot of time, all within a decade or 2, perhaps, depending on where you put all these books. And that 4 people did it says everything about the man himself. And Sunday I was teaching Sunday school, and we've been on John 4 and the Jesus at the woman at the well, and and we've just been in that chapter for about 5 or 6 weeks. That's the way my adult Sunday school class goes. And Jesus is just breathtaking. He's undefinable. And Jonathan Edwards had this great line, which Tim Keller has done wonders with. Jesus had these admirable conjunction of diverse excellencies. I said to my Sunday school class, I said, if you watch the Republican debates of 2016, I've said that on my videos before, if you watch the Republican debates of 2016, all the Republicans are posturing to be as stronger than anyone else. We're strong, 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 strong. If you watch the Democrats this time, we're kind. We're going to do more. We're going to give more. We're going to be kind, kind, kind. And here's the thing. You need to be strong and kind. And a great person learns to be both strong and kind, but they seem like they're diverse. That strongness and kindness don't seem to go together. So when you can figure out how to be strong and kind both, you go up. And you read Jesus, and he is both strong and kind. You read the Sermon on the Mount, he is more demanding. I love this story from the Reformed Journal, where a woman who used to write for the Reformed Journal, this is back in the 80s, I've told this story before in my videos too, back in the 80s, she was teaching an English literature class in a secular university in Texas in 80s, in the Bible Belt, and decided to give out the Sermon on the Mount just as a project, put it out there and ask people to write a paper to evaluate the Sermon on the Mount. And many of the students didn't recognize it, which is astounding. Goes back to Boomsma's point. And almost everybody hated it. Because, well, what does Jesus have to say in the Sermon on the Mount? Do you see how hard he raises the moral bar? If you say something about another person, you're in danger of the fires of hell? We hate fundamentalists who talk this way. And then he says, if you even look at another woman with lust in your eyes, you've committed adultery. And we think, this is impossible. Who would say things like this? But this is the same Jesus that when he goes to the house of a Pharisee and they don't wash his feet, which would have been the hospitable thing to do. A woman of questionable reputation comes and lets down her hair, which is a scandalous thing to do in public, and washes her feet with her tears and wipes her feet with her hair, and the Pharisees are aghast. And Jesus accepts this. And they're like, if he's anything more than just a dude of questionable reputation. And in fact, I've been thinking a lot about this whole reputation thing, that Jesus doesn't care about his reputation. In fact, he lets his reputation get so bad that the competing ends of the culture war all hated him enough to have him killed. That's the story of Jesus. He is undefinable. And the reason that the most amazing literary feat of all time gets accomplished by 4 people who are nearly unknown, and they do it all like once, says not so much necessarily about the authors, but about the man that they were writing about. And this is one of the reasons I can't leave Christianity, because I can't leave Jesus. Because when I was I went to Christian school, I grew up in the church, and then I went to Calvin College, and even at Calvin College, which is a Christian college, but the way of Calvin College was not like Wheaton, where you had to sign a pledge or anything. Basically, in the Christian Reformed Church, in some ways, Calvin College was a little bit, at least back in the day when I went there, a little bit like Amish, I'm going to say it wrong, Rumspringa, because you go to Calvin College and your parents aren't there. And at Calvin College, they no longer had mandatory chapel or mandatory church services. And so many people who grew up in a hothouse Christianity went to Calvin College, and, beer and drugs and sex and all the usual things that you do at college. And a lot of that was unbelief too. And so I began to read the Bible for the first time, because I said, if I want to continue to be a Christian, I should read this. And so I started reading the Gospels, because they're some of the most fun of the Bible, Genesis and the Gospels. It's really amazing stuff. Started reading the Gospels, and what on earth is going on in these books? I mean, all this time spent on what you do on the Sabbath or not Sabbath. Of course, growing up in the Christian Reformed Church, is that Sunday or not Sunday? But you start to read Jesus and you're like, what does this have to do with the way church has become now? And figuring that out is really not very easy, but I began to recognize that yes, the faith I had inherited, you could draw it all the way back to that book, but that passage itself is complicated. And that's why I appreciate the work that Tom Holland has been doing. But there's a moral beauty to Jesus that almost everyone sees and is just striking. But here again, it's so strange. There's this moral beauty to Jesus, to a man that everyone's like, oh, if I'd been around Jesus, it would have been rainbows and ice cream and glittery things on my face. They killed him. They couldn't stand him. They hated his guts so much. Even highly religious people conspired with their worst enemies to put him to death. That is the story. And to the degree that you believe anything about Jesus, that's something that if you have issues about the supernatural, you've got no problem with that part of the story. They hated his guts. And that's one thing I'd love to hear Sam Harris say, because that would be one of the more truthful things that he would say. If he'd say, you know what? This Jesus that you all worship, in fact, in the lifetime he lived, he was so unpopular they killed him. And he's far more popular dead than alive. And your great preacher, thousands of people listened to him, and what they wanted was the miracle show and the bread he was giving out. What kind of a preacher can that be? And you think you're going to wade in there and convert people when the Son of Man and the Son of God comes down and talks and everybody's like, that's really offensive. I kind of want to kill the guy. Well, just a few people, prostitutes, sinners, tax collectors, low status, outcast people of society, they loved him. It's not unlike today where try and find a homeless person that doesn't believe in God. Go ahead. Many of the homeless people I know, the woman I talked to, she's from space. That's what I'm from space. Okay, you're from space. But I live in church. I thought, yeah, you're living in church now. You're living in my church. You're not questioning about God. She lives in space. Sam had said, these Christians are deluded. Part of me listens to him and says, yeah, you got a point. You have no idea, Sam. You have no idea. You think you have problems with the Bible? I could point out I could fill your canon with so much biblical fodder you have no idea, but I believe it still. And part of it is because of Jesus. And because what kind of man like this makes claims like this? Oh, well, these claims, these were accretions added later on. Really? Last week I preached out of the book of Hebrews, and again, one of the issues that I have with a lot of contemporary scholarship about the New Testament is, show me the New Testament books that adequately deal with the destruction of the temple. That's 70 AD. That's really early. And what you find in the book of Hebrews, which I think is quite early, it's Christian preaching from quite early. There it is, fully. They don't know what to do with Jesus. He's God, he's man. How do we put this together? We don't know, but we can't deny both sides. And then I find the transformative power in unremarkable and flawed people. Now, you will find saints, and they are remarkable. But what I often find is the transformative power of the gospel in people who aren't remarkable for their godliness or their holiness. But you see it in glimmering ways where you see outstanding examples of the other side too, don't get me wrong, but this is the thing that the religious authorities saw in the book of Acts, that they couldn't figure out about the disciples. You read about the disciples and the Gospels, and they're complete misfits. And then the Holy Spirit comes, and they're bold. They don't get everything right. Peter and Paul had disagreements. The New Testament church is just as combated and conflicted as the church today. Read Paul's letters closely. You'll see it. It's all there. Nobody's keeping up appearances. Ever watch that on PBS? Great show. Miss Bouquet. Mrs. Bucket. That's how Christians are. And I see this and I think, yeah, is it crazy sometimes? You bet it is. But I can't deny it. It's too real. And then there's the church. So many people I know have left Christianity because of the church. They were hurt in church. And in fact, just this last Sunday, I was, the leaders of the church, they have conflicts with each other, and there are church fights and church splits, and people in church can be so petty. And so people come into church looking for saints, and what do they find? They find sinners. Sort of like going to the hospital looking for doctors, and what do you find? Can doctors fix you up? Everybody loves the nurses because the nurses are doing the grunt work. It's really closer to what pastors are. C.S. Lewis, far better read than I will ever be, far more intelligent than I will ever be, far more articulate than I will ever be, had given up faith young. His mother died when he's 6. And his father, the death of his mother, who by all accounts was a remarkable, wonderful, beautiful, terrific woman, devastated his father, who was always emotionally distant, did not know what to do with his sons. So young Jack, not very good at sports, he was missing a I can't even think of it. A hinge. Maybe I'm going senile. He's missing a joint in his finger. Couldn't play sports. Terrible. His father didn't know what to do with him. Sends him to boarding school. Boarding school is horrible. Church is, far worse than I'm sure Tom Holland was ever subjected to. Just a disaster. So by the time then has to go to World War I. As a promising, brilliant guy, his teacher. He's trained by a former Christian who's a far sharper atheist than Sam Harris will ever be. The old knock trains Jack. And so Lewis gave up the faith for pastoral reasons and was trained in atheism by a really sharp, hard-bitten man. And so then goes to World War I and watches his friends die in the trenches, and his best buddy for whom he has a pact. And then he has the kind of wound that has him ride out the war. And then he takes up with the guy he made the pacts with, mother, and he can't get on the same page as his father, and he's bitter, and he's anti-Christian, and he's an atheist, and he's smart, and he loves classics, and could have been Nietzsche. And then meets guys like J.R.R. Tolkien and Owen Barfield. And Owen Barfield being his second friend. Why can't I think of his gay first friend, Lewis's gay first friend? He had a meaning crisis far greater than I will ever know. Born in the trenches of the First World War, had plenty of baggage to work through. Becomes a Christian. First popular book, Screwtape Letters, second chapter. My dear Wormwood, one devil writing to another. It's audacious that Lewis writes this book in an age where, we've got real doubts about God, but pitchforks and tails and horns and little red men. Ha! So Lewis writes a book about one demon writing to another about how to capture people. It's audacious. I note with grave displeasure that your patient has become a Christian. Do not indulge the hope that you will escape the usual penalties. Indeed, in your better moments, I trust you would hardly ever wish to do so. In the meantime, we must make the best of the situation. There is no need to despair. Hundreds of these adult converts have been reclaimed after a brief sojourn in the enemy's camp and are now with us. All the habits of the patient, both mental and bodily, are still in our favor. It's the habits. It's the context that we inhabit. One of our great allies at present is the church itself. Do not misunderstand me. I do not mean the church as we see her, spread out throughout all time and space and rooted in eternity, terrible as an army with banners. Every time I read that line, it gives me the shivers. That, I confess, is a spectacle that makes our boldest tempters uneasy. But fortunately, it is quite invisible to these humans. All your patient sees is the half-finished sham Gothic erection on the new building estate. And you can update that with any version in contemporary America or Australia you wish. When he goes inside, he sees the grocer. He doesn't see the grocer. He sees the grocer with a rather oily expression on his face, bustling up to offer him one shiny little book. I had to redo the font. Hang on. When one goes inside, he sees the local grocer with an oily expression on his face, bustling up to offer him one shiny little book containing a liturgy which neither of them understands, and one shabby little book containing corrupt texts of a number of religious lyrics, mostly bad and in very small print. This was the church that Bill Hybels tried to save by bringing in all of the excellence of the American entertainment industry. And this now holds, in many places in the United States and the world today. When he gets into his pew and looks around, he sees just a selection of his neighbors whom he hitherto had avoided. He sees all the people he doesn't want to be friends with. He doesn't want to know. You want to lean pretty heavy on those neighbors, one demon says to the other. Make his mind flit to and fro between an expression like the body of Christ and the actual faces in the next pew. It matters very little, of course, what kind of people that next pew really contains. No matter. Your patient thinks our Father below is a fool. Provided that any of those neighbors sing out of tune or have boots that squeak or double chins or odd clothes, the patients will quite easily believe that their religion must therefore be somehow ridiculous. Just go to a modern megachurch. The people on stage are trim and fit and skinny jeans, and the pastor is oh so charismatic, and the music is perfect, and the smoke machine, and the visuals, and the lights, and I can be a Christian in a place like this. Status! Maybe Justin Timberlake goes to my church. Watch John Christ's church hunting videos. They're genius. At his present stage, you see, he has an idea of Christian in his mind, which he supposes to be spiritual, but which in fact is largely pictorial. His mind is full of togas and sandals and armor and bare legs, and the mere fact that the other people in church wear modern clothes is a real, though of course an unconscious difficulty for him. I want to go to a church with smells and bells and architecture and give me all of those religious feelings. Okay. You can go to one church and have all of the happy American fun feelings. Watch Burn Powers. Go to the other side and say, I'm going to have all the deep, spiritual, liturgical, ethical, Gothic feelings, all the old feelings. Okay. Keep everything hazy in his mind now, and you will have all eternity wherein to amuse yourself by producing in him the peculiar kind of clarity which hell affords. Work hard then on the disappointment or anticlimax which is certainly coming to the patient during his first few weeks as a churchman. They even have a word for it in England, a churchman. We don't have that in America. The enemy allows this disappointment to occur on the threshold of every human endeavor. It occurs when a boy who has been enchanted in the nursery by stories from the Odyssey buckles down to really learning Greek. It occurs when lovers get married and begin the real task of learning to live together. In every department of life, it marks the transition from dreaming aspiration to laborious doing. The enemy takes this risk because he has a curious fantasy of making all these disgusting little human vermin into what he calls his free lovers and servants. Sons is the word he uses. Sons! With his inveterate love of degrading the whole spiritual world by unnatural liaisons with the two-legged creatures. Oh, these demons are Platonists. During their freedom, he therefore refuses to carry them by their mere affections and habits to any of the goals which he sets before them. And right there is a reason why so many people just give up. I want it to be fun. No, it's going to be hard. No, but it was supposed to be a different hard. It was supposed to be hard with a soundtrack. It was supposed to be hard with approving people. It wasn't supposed to be hard, the kind of hard that you stop and say, what am I doing? This is crazy. It wasn't supposed to be the kind of hard like divorce is hard, and like death is hard, and like loss of a child is hard, and a broken career, and bankruptcy, and cancer, and a long slog of banal, bitter suffering is hard. It wasn't supposed to be that hard. Have you looked at Jesus? Have you paid attention to what's in that Bible? Back up to the beginning of the sentence. Desiring their freedom, he therefore refuses to carry them by their mere affections and habits to any of the goals which he sets before them. He leaves them to do it on their own. And there lies our opportunity. But also remember, there lies our danger. If once they get through this initial dryness successfully, they become much less dependent on emotion and therefore harder to tempt. I've been writing hitherto on the assumption that the people in the next pew afford no rational ground for disappointment. Of course they do. If the patient knows that the woman with the absurd hat is a fanatical bridge player, or the man with squeaky boots a miser or extortioner, then your task is so much easier. What if they go to church and learn they really are Christians? They really are bad Christians. They really are people who are bitter and petty and lousy tyrannical mothers and fathers that hook up with prostitutes and cheat on their taxes and on and on and on and on. You discover that they're not these glorious saints in church. In fact, they're full of the worst kind of Christian sins, such as self-righteousness. And there they are, practicing their self-righteous games in their petty little church with whatever power they can get their little greedy hands on to try and control other people. We thought we were going to get away from all this in the church, right? All you then have to do is keep out of his mind the question, if I, being what I am, can consider that I am in some sense a Christian, why should the different vices of these people in the next pew prove that their religion is mere hypocrisy and convention? You may ask whether it is possible to keep such an obvious thought from occurring even to a human mind. It is, Wormwood. It is. Handle him properly and it simply won't come into his head. He has not been anything like long enough with the enemy to have any real humility yet. Okay, don't let him be humble. Don't let him be honest. What he says, even on his knees, about his own sinfulness is all parrot talk. Even his confessions of sin are BS. At bottom, he still believes he has run up a very favorable credit balance in the enemy's ledger by allowing himself to be converted, and thinks that he is showing great humility and condescension in going to church with these smug, commonplace neighbors at all. Keep him in that state of mind as long as you can. Your affectionate uncle. If you've never read Screw Tape Letters, you should. It's a lot of fun. So what do you, Sam Harris, really have to offer me? This is the third reason. Fourth reason. The first was the Bible. The second was Jesus. The third was the church. And the fourth is actually what the world has to see. Now, don't get me wrong. I love the world. I love the world in ways that if you knew, you'd probably never watch another video again of mine in your life. Yeah, go ahead, feel superior. Rewind and re-listen to what I just said. I'm already at the top 1% of human history of what this world has to offer. I have better medical care. I have more money. I have more comfort. Even on the scope of the United States, I'm not a wealthy man, but compared to just about everyone else in human history, the way we in this country count privilege and favorability, I'm on top, baby. And if I look even higher to heights above me, to people who have more money, more youth, better looking, any measure you want, look at the stars' lives. Are they better than I am? We're in the middle of a meaning crisis, baby. And what that meaning crisis shows is that the ways in which we count success and value in this world are very corrupt, and they are not working. When Howard Hughes offed himself, we all should have paid attention, because he had what Americans said everyone would want. He inherited a patent on drill rigging that was amazing. He bought Hollywood studios so he could sleep with as many stars and starlets as he could get his hands on. And he dies alone, a miser, with pots full of urine, fearing conspiracies and all these things. Oh, but that was mental illness. Oh, illness isn't going to come to you? Let me tell you something, baby. The age of decay gets us all. No one gets out of this world alive. So you're going to come to me now, Sam Harris, and say, give up, have rationality, chase well-being. Well, I'm at the top 1% of well-being in all of human history already. When I look up, it doesn't look much better. I, in fact, Sam, want more. Now, when I listen to Sam, he's actually offering me less, because when I look at my decisions, even the hard ones, I think, no, I want more. In fact, I want it all. C.S. Lewis makes the comment that this is, in fact, our issue, that we ask for too little. I, in fact, don't want to just have good medical care. So, hey, my father dropped dead at 77. All of a sudden, after a month of doctors looking at his heart as carefully as they could, he dropped dead. And the doctor just kind of said, we did our best. I don't know. He dropped dead, visiting with someone, spending his time in retirement, talking to one good guy who needed to talk to a pastor. He was in a diner, and he dropped dead at the table. And I thought, that's exactly how he would want to go. He left this world at a pastoral coffee and went straight to the banquet of the Lamb. Sam, can you really offer me more than that? You say, well, that's just superstition. That's just story. But listen to what that story does for me. Encourages me to not walk away from a church that's surrounded by homeless people. To get a better church, in the words of that one member's grandma. But spend my life talking to real people who maybe aren't at the 1% of people. Because I believe I can pour my life out and to do all the kinds of things that people, no matter how secular, would say, oh, that's really important to do, but you've only got one life to live, so just do it if it's meaningful. Well, I'll tell you something. Dealing with homeless people, every now and then it feels a little meaningful, but it only feels meaningful because it's wrapped within the story of this Jesus who gave his life. He only lived 33 years. He was not at the top 1%. In fact, his worst years were his ministry years in some ways, and The Last Temptation of Christ, and many other authors have noted, well, if he just kept his mouth shut, maybe he could have lived to 40 or 50 and had a wife and a family and had all of the things that normal people would want. But no, he gave himself up for people that didn't even like him and eventually plotted and succeeded in his death. And we look at that and we say, wow, that's the definition of good. Can this world afford good? Well, just in little bits, but you really have to be responsible and practical. No, I want more, Sam. I want eternity. And I don't know what God will do with Plato and Aristotle. You got a better indication of what he'll do with St. Augustine and C.S. Lewis. And I expect to meet them. And I expect to meet Jack. And I expect to meet Augustine. And I expect to spend time talking with them. And I'd like to meet Socrates. Peter Kreeft is in the same boat as me. I'd like to meet Socrates, and I'd like to talk to them, and I'd like to pour myself out to make this world a better place in anticipation of a time when we've been there 10,000 years bright shining as the sun, and we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. And when that vision comes upon me, I will believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ, and I will believe in the redemption of the saints, and I will believe in the life to come. And if I am wrong, I am prepared to be wrong. Because according to your judgment, Sam, I just go into the big sleep. And if I'm wrong, let's not worry about Pascal's wager. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I don't lose. I find no aught in your pervasive isness. If the naturalist vision is true and I am free from all that Iron Age religion, I see no reason not to pursue it. If my appetites find it enjoyable, every virtue teacher throughout the centuries has noted that, and Sam Harris will do it himself. Sam Harris is in some ways a Puritan. He's not a skirt chaser. He's got a beautiful, smart, brilliant wife, seems to have lovely daughters and a happy marriage. Good for him. He's leveraged virtue and, quite frankly, a Christian vision of marriage to find the happiness that it affords. And I begrudge him none of that loss. But the ought that he posts on me doesn't say that I ought not indulge in moderating my own appetites in the service of others, in the hope of heaven. To me, that's a very reasonable approach to life. You might say, well, you can't believe in the resurrection. You can't believe in Jesus' miracles. You can't believe in the second coming. Okay, but I find no ought in your pervasive isness to say that I ought not live my life that way. And in fact, I'm probably a better neighbor than the hedonist next door that is living anxiously between 0 and 80, trying to check off things on that bucket list and get all the pleasure he can. Sam doesn't live that way. Brett doesn't live that way. Most virtuous, sane people, religious or not, don't live that way because it's a stupid way to live. Save me the philosophical moralizing about justified belief. I don't care. If I want to indulge myself in visions that spending time with drunk and homeless people affords me life of the age to come, what ought can you offer me that tells me not to? And if I can only do it by believing that Thomas touched the hands of Jesus, I will do so. In fact, many days I do so happily. And I'm surrounded by thousands of years of Christians producing stuff after the Bible. All this stuff that Brett Weinstein talked about. All these hard things about things set in stone and what they produce around them. While they're still out there, go out and explore the coral reefs of the ocean. It's because they're hard that they flourish and they're surrounded by fish. Go out into those I was just in Hawaii. Go out into those vast sands of reason with nothing hard and sticky there. Yeah, you'll find a fish here and there, but it's the coral reefs and all that hardness. So I'm going to stick to it. I find no ought in your pervasive isness. I actually messed up in my last draft for Sunday last week, and those of you who watched the sermon over on the church channel, it's about 50 of you, we'll see that, in fact, this was the ending of the sermon that just I forgot to do it in my last draft. Just simple omission. Yeah, a lot of C.S. Lewis in this, and I know some of you don't like C.S. Lewis, which is fine. We all have our tastes. Last Battle is one of my favorite books of his. And it's a book in which I remember reading it for the first time and just so disturbed by the by the beginnings of the book, because everything I loved about Narnia is being taken apart. It's all coming apart. All the good guys are losing and the bad guys are winning, and it's all going wrong. Some of you might look up this quote, and there are levels to this. And here is Emeth, a soldier of the enemy that Aslan brings in. Read the book. It's a children's book. It's easy to read. Read all the books. Then he breathed upon me, Aslan, and took away my trembling from my limbs and caused me to stand on my feet. And after that he said not much, but what that we should meet again, and I must go further up and further in. Then he turned him about in a storm and a flurry of gold, and was gone suddenly. The difference between old Narnia and new Narnia was like that. The new one was a deeper country. Every rock and flower and blade of grass looked as if it meant more. I can't describe it any better than that. If you ever get there, you will know what I mean. It was the unicorn who summoned up what everyone was feeling. He stamped his right forefoot on the ground and neighed and cried, "I have come home at last. This is my real country. I belong here. This is the land I have been looking for all my life, though I never knew it until now." The reason why we love this old Narnia is that it somehow looked a little like this. Come further up and further in. Why am I still a Christian? I can't give this stuff up. And I don't intend to. And no one's shown me a good reason. Oh, I feel it. Trust me, I feel it. But when I stop and I think it through rationally, say, how should I live my life? To me, this is the best way I know.